And I think if it's all right with you, Roberto, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know we've got some more people joining us. We had quite a large crowd signed up, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from you and also to hear from our audience today as well, because we're so happy to have you here with us. Um, so welcome everybody to PAFA Pores, Dynamic Human Anatomy. For anyone who's new to events at PAFA, I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs here at PAFA, and I'm so excited to have so many of you here with us today. And I'd like to take this moment before introductions to acknowledge that where I'm speaking to you all from in Philadelphia are the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I also wanted to start by thanking any of our PAFA members, our museum members who are here with us. Thank you for supporting us today and every day. You help us have free programs like this. So if you're interested in future programming or supporting the museum or PAFA as a whole institution, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for more information on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a couple of quick Zoom thoughts and announcements before we get started. This program is being recorded, as you can tell. So it is being recorded and we are going to be uploading it to our YouTube channel later this week. So if you know of anybody who missed it, or if you, for some reason, your Wi-Fi goes out, know that it will exist in the world, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat momentarily as well. I also wanted to, before I hand things over to a special guest who's here to introduce our speaker today, I wanted to let you know the overall order of the program, excuse me. So we're going to have an introduction by Renee Folks in just a second. And then Roberto is going to be sharing their screen and presenting for the next hour or so. And then we are going to make sure to have time at the end of the program for questions. So if you'd like, you can drop questions in the chat as we go. We will try to address as many of them as we can at the end of the program. We'd love to hear from all of you. The other things I want to mention that this program is in conjunction with several exciting promotions. The first of which I know many of you already know is to celebrate the release of Roberto Osti's book. And we have a special promo code from the publishers for this event. When I drop all of the links I keep mentioning, I'm going to include that one as well. But if you like what you hear today, you should definitely pick up a copy. And also, if you leave today wanting to learn more about anatomy or getting to learn from the artist himself, he is going to be teaching some classes for our continuing education program. And there's still a few days left to register for those April-May courses. Some of them include figure drawing, watercolor, and more. So I'm also going to put in some links to that at the end. So now I'd love to just hand things over to Renee Folks, our chair of drawing and a professor at PAFA. Thank you so much for being here, Renee. And I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. I wanted to talk a little bit about the school as well as introduce Roberto. As the nation's oldest art museum and school, we teach from and support the figurative tradition. We have a rich heritage in working from the figure, and that was developed early into a formalized curriculum under the guidance of Thomas Akins. And the use of an extensive cast collection, life drawing, painting, sculpture, and anatomical study courses still form a core component of our educational structure as a 21st century institution here at the Academy. Students in all of our departments, animation, drawing, illustration, painting, printmaking, sculpture, all study from the human form. And we do so for its inherent beauty, for the complex formal structures of the body, and for the body's historical and contemporary narrative potentials. Today, it's my pleasure especially to introduce one of our esteemed faculty members, Roberto Osti. Roberto is in demand as an educator at multiple institutions and multiple programs, as you heard, not only our day school where Roberto teaches studio anatomy, but in the CE program and institutions all across the area. Formerly trained as a medical illustrator, Roberto has contributed to numerous scientific and art publications. And as a fine artist, his exquisite paintings have been shown throughout Europe and the United States. Roberto's first book, Basic Human Anatomy, was released in 2016 and became an art instruction bestseller. So now he's here with us this afternoon to share some of his concepts from his newly released book, Dynamic Human Anatomy. So we are so thrilled to have you here, Roberto. Welcome, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much. Thank you. So guys, welcome. Thank you for showing up in droves. It's really flattering and nice. So without further ado, I would like to start showing you some images. And as I mentioned before, I will start from, okay, first, this is a new book, the cover of the book. I also have some contact in here on the screen that if you want, you can take a screenshot for both me and the school. I would like to start with this presentation, discussing if you want, wait, why is not going?
You need to try the arrows on the bottom. Do you see those?
Yeah, I tried that. They go boom. Try me again. Hi. All right. So
let's exit and start again.
Yeah, I gotta do that.
We're gonna stop the share screen.
Strange, right? So okay, start again.
Always something with Zoom, but
here we go. And then it was working before, right? Just says, huh. Okay, let me try to do this again. Okay. Now escape doesn't work.
If you hover on the arrows, Roberto, down below, there we go.
All right. Okay, now it works, right? So strange, right? This is the mystery of technology, which is more and more like magic, right? So I am starting this presentation introducing a very little known but fantastic artist that was Pisanello. He was an artist that was between the Gothic tradition and the Renaissance, right in the middle. And I chose him because through him, I can bridge the two periods, the two eras, where the way of looking at the world changes. So as you can read in the title, I'm saying, I'm describing this period as like looking at the world for the first time, like imagine an adolescent person that sees the world, everything for the first time. Everything is so exciting, everything's so new. And Pisanello had this kind of, he kind of lived in a constant state of artistic frenzy, seems to me, because he was drawing and drawing and drawing constantly. And drawing is, I think, is a way of analyzing the world or looking at the world. It's not just copying, it's a way of becoming aware of it, because as you draw, you process your subject and then you recreate it, reproduce it with your visualizing your synthesis, right? So drawing has this it can be an incredibly creative conceptualization of a subject. So, but there is some systematization, some systematic approach to this, as we're going to see in his early drawing by Pisanello. So you see how he goes from fashion, costume, to animals. The systematic research, the study of animals that he has is incredible. You might want to look him up later and enjoy the incredible amount of works. But the systematic approach that he has, it made me think of the analytical approach that later on is developed during the Renaissance, and that eventually ushered in the scientific method of systematic study and finding the typical aspect of anything from human being to horses to animal, etc. So these studies, though, were a lot of fun, clearly, because he goes from sturgeons to horses to dogs' feet and monkeys and humans, right? Pisanello, he probably was involved in battle. He was in battle during one of the wars between city-states, I think specifically between Milan and Venice. And you can see, as you can see in the image on the lower left, is quite realistic of a warrior killing another one in clearly not a contrived way. It's just pure butchery, right? And then you see all these other drawing he did between nude models at the center, this dignitary from who knows where on the upper left, and these hairdos of noble women, probably at the court of Verona or Naples or Venice or who knows where, because he traveled from Venice to Naples, where he died. He also tackled the darkest or less proper aspect of life. Meaning, on the upper left we see a allegory of lust, with the rabbit that symbolizes frequent copulation. On the right we see this systematic drawings of hanged people, and they're not really they're real. You can see that some are in a state of decomposition. Some are just freshly hanged with the breeches half down. And there is this systematic approach going around somebody who's hanged, copying him from different angles and in different state of decomposition, has, I would say, a sort of semi-detached analytical approach that we were going to see later on in the Renaissance, right? So eventually Pisanello used all these studies, not all of them, some are just drawing for sake of drawing. He used them for his beautiful paintings, frescoes, many of whom were destroyed for various reasons. And you see on the left, you see this rider with this elaborate headdress and all these animals whom he studied in detail with various sketches from life. He was studying from life. One sketch that didn't fit in this presentation showed different nostrils of horses in various stages of opening, and I found that so incredibly I don't know, interesting, right? Who want to see the horse's nostrils widening and closing? He did, because probably having been in battle, he kind of was able to witness firsthand the emotional, the dramatic emotional impact that battle can have. On the right, we see instead that those sketches that he prepared about hanged people were then used in a painting on in this painting here on the right. See these two hanged people, right? So another very important artist that is, we can say he is at the beginning of the Renaissance, is Pollaiolo. Pollaiolo was one of the first, if not first, artists that dissected bodies. And pretty quickly, the dissection of the bodies that these artists were performing makes its way into the paintings, as we will see later on. This engraving is a drawing. This is a drawing. Is titled "Lamentation over the Body of a Hero." So, and this is typically a typical humanistic approach now to the arts and to the world, meaning that the deceased body is not a criminal that's being killed, someone who died for various reasons, but or that is eventually put on a dissection table, because that is a dissection table, but becomes a hero. And then you have the lamentation of friends and family around him. Notice also the parallel here with the lamentation of the dead body of Christ. That is something that comes from the Gothic and moves on all the way through the Renaissance. But in this case in here, we have a parallel between a sacred and let's say a juxtaposition between sacred and profane. The Christ's body is similarly laid down on a flat slab in the lamentation of that Christ, as this is over an anatomical slab. but this is a hero, is a person, is a warrior, and this reflects the humanistic person, the humanistic approach in art, in my opinion, because the humanistic thought shifts the interest of the philosophical, religious, artistic interest or research from the divinity to the human condition, the human being. This is an example of very famous, one of probably the biggest engravings that have been ever made by Pollaiolo, where he put to work all his knowledge of anatomy in this Battaglia degli Ignudi, the Battle of the Naked People, right? So, which is quite a sight, I guess. But of course, it's an excuse to show off the anatomical research that he was performing, a dissection together with his brother, various bodies. So from here, we get more into, I also wanted to include these two engravings because now we're going to move into the Renaissance, although this is past the Renaissance, but it is showing, it's a play that shows a shift in thought between the late Renaissance and moving on to the 1700s. And on the left, we have the organization of an academy in Rome about mid-1500. And we see how, I already showed this in occasion of other webinars, but in this case, I'm pairing it with another image, which I didn't show. So in this case, in here, we see the Roman Academy, probably, where we have a great attention on dissection, right? So this is a real cadaver that is being dissected in the classroom as the students are copying. And these, as you can see, are very young, very, very young students. So skeleton is real, the body is real and fresh. The teacher is dissecting the body, and they are copying, they're sketching. So artists were receiving a thorough, incredibly thorough anatomical education in the academy. It was part of the system. But later on, we have here on the right, an academy of the 1700s. And I included this because I want to show you how the approach to the study, the human body or anatomy, shifts during a period that is ushering in eventually the neoclassical art, right? So we here see, and so this is the motto, right? The motto for this artwork in here, and it's tanto che basti e mai abbastanza. Tanto che basti means just enough, mai abbastanza means never enough. What is that meaning? Some things you have to study just enough to get by, and other things you never will have enough of studying those, right? In here we see that the highest preoccupation or the thing that was considered most important for an artist's training was muses, right? The muse, the inspiration. And in here there is something that says, without us, forget it. Right? Or senza di noi ogni fatica è vana. Without us, any effort you might make, it will lead to nothing. So you need a muse as an inspiration of art, right? And then it's here, we says, these are classical models, right? These are sculptures. And these are also mai abbastanza, meaning the anatomical knowledge now was mediated via sculptures. There was not, the dissection was not as important anymore. But as you can imagine now, we have a derivative knowledge of anatomy during this period. And that usually it's really not necessarily good, because what you're doing is you are not experiencing anatomy directly as the artists of the Renaissance were, but you are experiencing it through the interpretation of another artist. So it tends to be derivative, right? So in the work below, in the images below here, we see that geometry here, right? This thing here says geometry here, tanto che basti, just enough to get by, right? Perspective, yeah, okay, you can do it like tanto che basta, just enough. But these on top, where these things that absolutely any artist should privilege, right? So we see that the contact with the human body, with the physicality of the human body, is now in this period limited. Whereas from the early Renaissance to the High Renaissance, the dissection was very, very important. And why is that? Because if you think about that, this is an example of works of High Renaissance, right? We have Titian in the middle, and the knowledge that these artists had of anatomy was sublime, was excellent. If you have a knowledge of anatomy that is so thorough, the images that you create, the body that you create, are going to be incredibly powerful emotionally, and they can convey a sense of death or sense of life, right? So if you paint somebody who's in a martyrdom or dead or killed or running, etc., and you know anatomy, your work is going to be so much more powerful in rendering these emotions and movement, etc. As you can see on the right, there is a work by Vesalius, made by von Kalkar. Jan von Kalkar was the engraver that did the work for Vesalius, and he studied at the school of Titian. So some of the work of von Kalkar are arranged pretty much like the work that we see here in an academy, hang by ropes, because in a standing position, you could have an all-around view, hang from ropes, all-around view of the cadaver, and you could flay it much better. This Saint Sebastian is clearly something that's been inspired by a cadaver that was probably available in one of the classroom of Titian, right? So, in fact, Vesalius studied in Padua, in Italy, and then went to teach to Bologna, where anatomy was restarted in the 1370s. So about two centuries before Vesalius eventually finished his De Humanis Corporis Fabrica, the book of anatomy that became the first systematic treatise of anatomy. But these are examples of the sharp intellectual eye, as I described it before, of the artist of the Renaissance. On the left, we have a leg by Michelangelo, which is incredible. It's all the muscles are there, right? So these artists were dissected. All of these artists were dissected personally. So, as I already mentioned in previous lectures, that experience is a very powerful experience that really will. It's not just about understanding or remembering the muscles, but it's also becoming aware of the physicality of the body, of the physical aspect of the body. And after that, you don't do mannerized bodies or polished bodies, we might see later on during the mannerism or neoclassical. That experience is too powerful and also too fascinating to forego. So we see Michelangelo on the left, and we see Leonardo below, where he just incredibly beautiful visualization of the muscles rendered as strings to better visualize the origin and insertion of the muscle. And you see how all these muscles are rendered as strings, the pectoralis, right? And that way, he beautifully synthesizes the muscle, but also shows you more clearly how the fibers are organized, and basically he visualizes the inner elegance also of the muscle. It's not just visual showing muscle, it's also creating a typical visualization of the muscle, right? On the above here, we see a hanging dead body, probably from the school by Raphael, And in here we see a life drawing by Raphael, where the lower leg here is flayed, right? So on the upper part in here, under imaging here, we see a sketch by Raphael, and look how incredibly interesting it is. We have the study of Christ drawn as a skeleton, and then the Virgin Mary holding him up. So probably this is a Pietà, but he is clearly using here the method devised by Leon Battista Alberti about, I would say, 150 years earlier, of approaching the human body as a building, starting from the foundation and the basic structure, and then building up on top of it. So start from the skeleton, then the muscle, and then the skin, and then the clothes, and then giving it life. Right? So what happened? Here we go. Oh no. Let me try this, right? There you go. So now here, what I did, I create, this is from the book, right? Finally, you're saying, right? This is from the book. And it's a series of images I created to show two things. One is that this can be synthesized as the Florentine structural method, right? So they, again, going back to Leon Battista Alberti, he says, well, the artist should first draw the skeleton, then the muscle, then the skin, etc., and then the flesh, and then the clothes, etc. So in this case in here, I visualized that method, but also at the same time, I tried to do a study to see if how accurate, and Michelangelo, forgive me, right? How accurate Michelangelo's work is, and no surprise here, is incredibly accurate. So what I did, I took the, going to this image in here, right? I visualized, I marked the basic landmarks, right? So what are the landmarks? The landmarks are points in the figure where the skeleton is palpable. Or in the case of the soft landmarks are on the surface, like the nipples, like the linea alba, like the navel, like the inguinal ligament. And these are soft landmarks, right? But the skeletal landmarks are point where the skeleton is visible. So why do I care about those? Because if I find those just as dots in a thin line, I can reconstruct the skeleton, right? So I'm looking at my model. Let's say this is not David, it's a model in the classroom. And what I do, I'm gonna start looking for a structural aspect. I don't want to start copying the figure to following the lines and the curves. I want to synthesize, I want to analyze systematically my subject to have access to the structure that gives it its strength, its balance, his coherence in terms of volume and forms, etc. So in this case in here, I found the sternal notch, the clavicles, I found the head of the humerus, the sternum, the costal arch, the end of the rib cage here, more or less, the iliac spine 1 and 2, the pubic bone, the knees, etc. And with those, I reconstructed the skeleton, right? And that's how you would fit the skeleton inside the figure. You have to anchor it to the landmarks, right? The skeletal landmark. After that, right? After that, what I did, I built the skeleton, the muscle on top of it, and it's incredibly accurate. Michelangelo, again, no surprising here. He started dissecting when he was 16, and then he dissected the whole life. He also tried to do a treaty, like an anatomical treaty for artists, like Leonardo did, but they were too busy painting ceilings and sculpting, you know, hitting chunks of marbles with a hammer, right? So they didn't have time to do that. But they did produce a great number of drawings that were supposedly to be used as a basis for an anatomical publication. So in this case here, this is the Battaglia delle Cascine, and it's a copy. It's a copy by an engraver that copied this from a copy of, I think, Rubens. And but just to tell you how, similarly to the Battle of Pollaiolo, But you see how incredibly more accurate the anatomy of this works. And here, even through the mediation of not just one artist, but two artists, right, that probably did not understand anatomy very well, you see that the excusing here of this battle is to show the human body in different level of torsion and movement, different angles, but also not just that. The body is so disposed and moved and interacting, are conveying a sense of urgency, a sense of anguish, like this old man in here, probably reaching for the young man that probably is his son, and are getting ready for battle. They're being caught unprepared by the enemy, and they were taking a bath. And the enemy is coming, right? So quick, put your breeches on, right? Put your breeches on, right? Like that. So, sorry guys, I don't know why it's doing this, but there you go. So now what happened at a certain point, and I think this is an important passage, at the basically at the height of Renaissance, we have Luther and the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. So we have the two heroes, if you want, of each. On the left, we have Luther, and on the right, we have Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Reformation to the left, Counter-Reformation to the right. You also might want to notice the difference in fashion statement, right? I would say that Luther is more a cool New Yorker at the art opening, always wearing in black with a beret, he just needs glasses, right? And he would be the very cool art critic. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, instead, he's much more flamboyant. Could also be a New Yorker, right, with the very flamboyant garb in here, with the divine inspiration hitting him. But you can see from here, you can see the two basic approaches to religion. One, very rational, right, and matter of fact. The other one, emotional, inspired, and really not rational, because the rationality of the Renaissance that we have described so far is what created all this trouble. So the Bible got translated, people start thinking and reading, and then we have the Reformation. So the Jesuits pushed back with the Counter-Reformation, and we have now Baroque, right? I would say Baroque is the period that epitomizes the Counter-Reformation, so the Jesuit and the Council of Trento describe what it is that artists have to do when they paint art, meaning the church start deciding again what can be painted, what is proper to be painted, what is not proper to be painted. So the artists had to deal with that, right? The artists become again described as the painting, the art becomes again the Biblia Pauperum. Biblia Pauperum means is the Bible of the poor people, meaning people that pauper, the poor, was also synonym of illiterate. So if you are it's not today, like today we have a lot of rich people that are illiterate, right? At the time, it was if you were poor, you were illiterate. If you are rich, you had an education. So in here, we see that the paintings become again a way of transmitting the gospel or the content of the Bible via images, because people could not read it. That was one of this was sanctioned by the Counter-Reformation. But the artists say, wait a second, I just don't want to be an illustrator, right? Because I'm a painter and I want to come up with my own concept. And but they always have to sneak it in, right? They had to sneak it in. So Caravaggio always challenged those limits. And in fact, I think that's what makes his genius, right? He knew anatomy very well. He knew absolutely anatomy incredibly well. Some say he didn't, but looking at his work, I think he really knew anatomy incredibly well. And that was in fact indispensable to know anatomy, because another dictation of the Counter-Reformation is that the artist must study anatomy, because when you have a scene of martyrdom, that scene of martyrdom has to be very, very convincing and real. It has to convey a sense that the martyred saint is suffering. It has to convey the fact that that really happened, right? It has to make you feel there, right? So, and also, most of all, a painting has to convince people through emotions. A painting has to leverage emotions and not rationality. But you can imagine why. So emotions make you do or think things that you would not accept rationally, right? So it becomes a very subtle method of propaganda. In fact, the Jesuit also invented propaganda, which is propaganda fide, right? The propagation of the faith. It is of this period. So in this time here, we see now that the martyrdom or the crucifixion of Saint Peter is upside down, but Caravaggio makes it look like they are masons kind of lifting a piece of rock or something. They're working and grunting and sweating. There's really nothing. And also, St. Peter seems to give direction. Say, watch it, watch it, watch it. You're hitting a vase there, right, with the cross, right? He doesn't seem to be suffering much because he's a saint, right? But his crucifixion with his nail going through the hands, etc., are quite real, right? And this struggle of these workers, right? Because they really do look like carpenters, right? Or lifting this guy here upside down. It's quite realistic. Look at the dirty feet of the person at the bottom left. You hear these dirty feet. They are so incredibly real, right? The idea of Caravaggio was to challenge the limits of all type, right? Light and dark, time, right? So this example, all this work in here happened not 1500 years prior in Palestine, but happened now in Rome. Is the people are all dressed like Roman of the time. So he challenges that time. The people are not biblical characters, are Roman people, are people that live there. So he challenges this in the sense that he's saying, this is not happening back then, it's happening now again, and you are here living it. So he travels through time. He travels through, he uses light to challenge the form, because you see in certain areas, the form is completely overwhelmed by the shadow, right? So that's it, open form versus closed form, right? And you see on the left, I particularly like the St. Thomas, the painting of St. Thomas, the Incredulity of St. Thomas, because it has an incredible symbology, which is, so number one, the first thing we see is this division here, right? See this line here, right? There's a line here. That line, I think, symbolizes the divine versus the human, right? And these three men, especially St. Thomas, is peeking his head through that, kind of reaching into the divine dimension and putting the finger inside God, right? So that act is so incredibly powerful that I don't think the Reformation had this in mind when they were thinking of using emotion, but Caravaggio really is now testing that limit, right? And you know the gospel situation when Christ comes back to visit his followers, and all of them recognize him except for Thomas. And Thomas said, "Who are you?" "It's me. I'm your master." "No, I'm not really sure." So Christ says, "Why do you put your finger in my wound?" But in the gospel, I don't think that happens. I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen. Thomas said, "No, I believe you." But Caravaggio brings it, keeps going with that, and put the finger of Thomas inside himself. So now that can be seen. This incredible act, this incredible image here can show both this terrifying moment where Thomas finds his finger inside the divinity, and who knows what feels, right? But I also like to think that this could be seen in a different way. This could also be the inquisitive mind of humans that go exploring everything. They go exploring the divine as well as anatomy. Because if you think about that, that finger goes inside of the physical body, right? This is a moment where the physicality is very important, again, as I said before, because it really emphasizes, put the attention on the actual death and physical death of Christ, to make the sacrifice so much more real and convincing, right? So now that finger, I like to think, is a scientific finger that goes exploring inside the divinity, and philosophically, anatomically, conceptually. And I find it, if I had the money, I would buy it. It's just incredibly powerful painting and artwork, right? So, and now in here, what I did, because then I'm going to start with some images that show how to use the anatomy, right, from the book. So in here we see the painting of Caravaggio on the left, right? On the right. That is the calling of St. Thomas. St. Thomas is here, right? And what it is Christ is, sorry, not St. Thomas, St. Matthew, right? St. Matthew. So Matthew was a tax collector and was living a dissolute life and gambling and beating up people to extract taxes, and eventually gets a calling. So we have here this incredibly beautiful composition where we see a division, again, as we saw before, between the divine and the human, right? The divine is and the sublunaris, the world under the moon where human live, right? Sublunaris. This is a Roman tavern, right? And Christ now send his inspiration, divine inspiration, to Matthew, that is still not aware of it. And this inspiration, this conversion, is sent by the light, which is now during this period metaphoric for God, right? The divine inspiration, the light, right? So you see in here where we have this light coming through like this, right? And this circle of thugs, because that's what they were. They were thugs, going up people up to, beating people up to collect taxes. They would keep a percentage. Is like a baseball mitt. See that it catches the inspiration and hands up in here, right? But he's kind of dense, right? They had to kind of call him and say, hey, Jesus is calling you, right? Because he's too much engrossed in the money collecting. This was made probably 1599, 1600, right? And this one instead is 30 years later. This is Velasquez on the left, and you see there's a similar composition, but it going from the left to the right. You see still this baseball mitt catching the Apollo's order, right? And it's not a sacred painting; it's a profane painting. But look what an incredible display of anatomical knowledge we have here from Velasquez, where we have the front view, we have the back view, we have the side view, and then we have the three-quarter bent view, right? So it's almost like anatomical demonstration that I would do in a classroom, or an anatomy teacher would do in the classroom. You show the body from different point of view, and in here, what I did with this, I created a dissecting a masterpiece. So dissecting a masterpiece is a study that's similar to what I did with the David, right? I analyzed the work to see how accurate the anatomy is, and again, no surprise, incredibly accurate, right? So starting from the skeleton blocking in the clavicle, the sternal notch, the head of the humerus in here, the joint, the olecranon, the elbow joint, the olecranon, the wrist joint, the ulna and radius, and all this stuff, and the inside of the tibia with this little bump in there. That little bump in there is the goose foot, right? The pes anserinus with the tuberosity of the tibia. I mean, all these things are so incredibly well positioned, down to the most minute detail. this is not imitation. This is conceptualization of the human body that comes from a great knowledge of the anatomical structure. So again, they were studying anatomy thoroughly. And probably, I don't know if Velasquez dissected personally, or I don't know if Caravaggio dissected personally, but nevertheless, the anatomical knowledge of these artists is quite remarkable. We can see here the brachioradialis, we can see that the tricep, the head of the tricep, the tendon of the tricep, and the deltoid in between the two volumes. It's incredibly accurate. So then from there, I studied other components, right? Where the image on the left is Vulcan probably, and the other one are assistants. And the skeleton is proportion, both in the front and in the back view. And you can extrapolate the skeleton from this image, quite accurate. So if you look at this line here, right, what that is the acromion, and it's typically exactly like that. The acromion goes, this bumping here at the junction between the spinal scapula and the acromion, and then move on to the clavicle. This is the vertebral margin of the scapula, of course, and this is not the bone of the scapula, is the teres major. In here you have the spine, you have the rectus spinae, you have you have everything. Everything is incredibly correct, right? And in fact, I have another image here, right, where I created now going from the skeleton to the muscle to the external forms. So throughout my book, I have this connection, correspondence between the deep layers of the skeleton and the superficial layer of the skeleton. So I don't need to go over this again, but you see what I'm saying. If you can layer up the muscle, starting from the structure, starting from an artwork like this one, it means that the anatomy is quite correct, right? So in this case, it's an example I did with starting from a drawing, from a photograph from Croquis Café, right? All these sites became very popular suddenly, right? So different, we can analyze the form from this point of view. This is more like a lines of action, right? Lines of action, or synthesizing this pose with if just basic line, as few lines as possible, trying to capture the more than anatomical aspect or structural aspect, the soul, the spirit of the movement, if you want, trying to synthesize the movement, but also the aesthetic aspect, right? So the aesthetic aspect that can be almost like a distilled visualization of the organic and structural complexity of the figure. So after that, I tackled I drew the figure. Actually, let me look at this, right? I drew the figure like this, right? Where I dissected, virtually dissected the image, position it. And again, the muscle are visible, no surprise here, that's a picture, so the muscle are all there. But and then eventually from here, the skeleton, right? Try to find the skeletal structure. But the thing is this, is that when you see a little bump here, a little bit bump in there, if you don't know what that bump is, you might position it a little bit higher, a little bit lower, a little bit too forward, etc. Once you know what that bump is, you know that one bump represents the trochanter, the other bump represents the extremity of the femur, and now you can draw the femur. You can connect the two bumps and with the femur. And then if you see another bump below here, and so on, you can connect all these bumps. And suddenly those bumps are have names, have a function, and they come beautifully, harmoniously together, and it can become the structure of your artwork, right? So in here, same thing, I did a similar work using the Doryphoros, the spear bearer of Polykletos on the left. Similarly, the anatomy of this work is not necessarily very realistic like it would be in the David or in our painting that we have seen earlier on, but accurate, very accurate too, right? The David tends to be much more accurate because there is much more anatomical description because Michelangelo, again, he was dissecting. Polycletus was maybe dissected, we don't know that, but he relied more on an idealized anatomy based on sound anatomical knowledge, but it was then, let's say, polished or revisited or systematized, taking away some of the harshness, or I would say harshness, but the realism that in a classical work might be a little bit too much, too distracting, right? But the David has a very interesting balance between idealized form and realistic forms, because many more bumps, many more details that tell us about the knowledge that he had about the human body. This is a plate that two plates that you find in the book, and it's a chart that what I show the landmarks, right? The landmarks. There is also another chart that I did not include in this lecture. Is another chart where I show the external forms and the correspondence between internal and external forms. But the idea in this book is to kind of be able to identify these landmarks in the model, as we know. And this is where I heard it was a cry for help from a student, like when we're in the classroom and we try to identify the landmarks, it's difficult, especially because there is a great variability between models, and sometimes, and actually very often, these landmarks are very subtle. So with this book, in this chapter in here, I set out to enumerate, catalog all the landmarks from different points of view, so that they can be more easily identified and then utilized in the practice of figure drawing. So moving on, there's also, once we understand the landmarks, right, we also have, there's a chapter in the book where I describe now how to read the landmark in poses, in different poses. I just focus on specific points, bumps and dots, and from those I can reconstruct the skeleton, right? So this shadow here is the end of the rib cage, right? This sharp line here is the iliac crest. This sharp line here is the vertebral margin of the scapula. This is the serratum, and so on and so forth. Once I read this, right, then I can practice, we can practice using this example that again are in the book, drawing from imagination if you want, and try to positioning muscles over the skeleton. But in this case here, using a conceptualization that clearly derived from Leonardo's approach of reducing the body as the muscle as strings. But in this case here, I wanted to put the emphasis on the harmonious aesthetics here that this muscle have when they come together, right? So this radiating patterns, like here, both on the rest position, but also in movement, right? In fact, I have images in movement that show the same that show various patterns, right, created by the muscle. So this is another example how to imagine the figure on the left is the model. You see a few bumps, you get those bumps, and then you fill in the rest. So what we see is just these lines in here, right? The line of the pectoralis. We see this line here, which is the line of the costal arch and then the rib cage. We see this line here, which is the line of the iliac crest and a dot. And that's what we see, right? So now from there, we can reconstruct what is not seen here, right? And that is eventually the whole skeleton. And from there, we can build up the muscles more correctly, right? So it's really a systematic approach to reading the figure. It's a multi-layer approach. When we use a multi-layer approach, we have a much more complex and complete understanding of the human figure. What that does is gives us more choices, and more choices of interpretation, of visualization, result in more creativity, result in creativity. So diversity, complexity equal creativity. So meaning I don't just copy what I see in front of me, critically, but I want to interpret what's in front of me using various approaches, various parameters, and etc. So in this case in here, I systematize also this kind of visualized systematization of the four visualizations. So on the left, we have the stereometric. Here we have the skeletal structure. Here we have the sternal form, and here we have the muscular, right? So all of these things in here can be accessed by understanding what we see in the model. For example, as you see in this work in here, we see the how to read the skeleton of the leg. Right, this is the figure, right? This is the figure I have in front of me. I find dots. I find one dot in here. That's a trochanter, an egg-shaped volume here. The pubic bone, the end of the genital, iliac crest, etc. And with those, you know, the tendon of the bicep, with the head of the fibula, with those, I can now reconstruct the skeleton, right? And once I have this, I can now move on to add the muscular forms on top, right? Can you ask me a favor? Can you give me the phone? Thank you, love. So in here, in a more complex pose, right? In a more complex pose, let's say this is the model, right? And thank you. And in here, we see how we can read again the skeleton, right? The skeleton here, blocking the essential vectors of the skeletal versus bone, and then build up the skeleton from here. And having our knowledge of anatomy, we can read better the pathways of the muscle, and eventually flay the figure and create again a virtual dissection of the model. But you see, we do not imitate. One thing that I stress when the student a lot: do not imitate. Don't copy a curve. You have to understand what that curve is, and that is not a curve anymore, is the margin of the deltoid, or is the upper margin of the latissimus dorsi that connects with the humerus, that is then connected with the shoulder, etc., etc. So the whole thing now becomes much more interesting, right? Because I'm not passively imitating forms, I'm interpreting form. So this takes some time, right? But it's the most difficult part of this is starting it, winning the preconceived ideas we have about anatomy, which is difficult. If we look at anatomy from a point of view of practical application, it becomes fun. It becomes fun because then you realize what a great access you have to your model. You're not frustrated anymore trying to copy forms and volume don't come together proportionally without knowing why. But with this, you can have a much better understanding of the form and interpret them, right? Be more active. You know, the same thing is valid for the foreshortened figure, right? So this foreshortened figure, we see how they a fairly complex angle of view can be analyzed from a stereometric point of view, as seen on the right, right? And of course, I have the juxtaposition of the two just to see how you can synthesize one realistic form into stereometric rendering. So stereometry, by the way, is a product of the Renaissance, where the forms of the human body are reduced to basic volumes so that they can be more easily measured and possibly put in perspective. But what they also give you, what a stereometric rendition gives you, is also an objective measurement. So when I look at an arm, when I look at the rib cage, when I look at the lower leg that are foreshortened, my brain still refuses to believe that, for example, like in this case, the lower leg is this short. My brain will make it longer. And or my brain refuses to believe that this volume here, right, is overlapping that arm volume in there so much. And why is that? Because That's how our brain works, right? We make assumptions. So in order to do that, we have to detach ourselves a little bit from the organic aspect of the figure, because we know figures standing up in a certain way. We know the rib cage is long. We know the hands are smaller, and we stick with that. So when we draw, that's what we do, right? That's what we do. But if we step back, now we have all these forms of the body are the synthesis of anatomical dissection and stereometric rendering with the proportional relationship, now are easily measurable. Now I look at this not as a thigh, but as a measure. How long is this in relation to this, right? I just measure the length. I don't worry about anatomy paradoxically. I just want to know how big and how wide, and what is the angle and overlapping between the various forms. So let me remove me from this that is too complex, has too much information, right? So let's see. Oh, there's a question I could answer, Deborah. So what convinced the church at the beginning of the Renaissance to re-allow artists to do a dissection when they had banned it for so many centuries? The thing is this, that the church really never banned but this is a commonly thought, like that, never banned dissection. The church put limits to it. It has to be done respectfully, and it was not really widespread use, but it had to be done respectfully, right? This is probably coming from the fact that connected with the resurrection, idea of the resurrection, where the body had to be maintained whole, because when you were resurrected, if you had your body all over the place, it was not a nice sight, right? So, but eventually, I can't remember what Pope sentenced it, but this Pope said that it doesn't matter if the body is exploded, it doesn't matter if the body is cut in pieces, it doesn't matter. When we resurrect, we'll be magically whole again. So that eventually took off some pressure from the artists that were, or the artists that were doing dissection, but still dissection had to be performed respectfully of the human body. So another reason, so the dissection was restarted in Bologna in 1370s, more or less, at the faculty of under the request of faculty of law, jurisprudence, because they decided that they need to find out, they have a specific like forensic department where they would investigate the cause of death of somebody. And in order to do that, they needed to have knowledge of the human body to dissect and see if the rich uncle had been poisoned by the spendthrift nephew to get the money, right? So so from there, the practice of anatomy, dissection anatomy, spread to the artists very quickly, and then eventually, just a few decades later, became widespread practice by artists in Bologna and Florence, and from there, Veneto, Padua, etc. I hope that that explains it, right? So let's see now. Let's see this one here. Now in here, I have now put in another sequence, right? This is in the book, right? We see here the skeleton rendered, but to this I rendered the whole figure. This is an exercise we do in class, right? We draw first the figure. In this case, I'm adding this now. I'm in this now for the last few classes. I've been adding this more and more because this really visualizes the inherent, I call them inherent aesthetics of the muscular flow, right? Because they are just so beautifully connected, right? And from here now we have this rendering of the muscle, the figure, and then the external forms, right? So So meaning we don't, when we get to this point, we don't copy bumps anymore, right? That line that we see here, we know is the division between the adductors and the quadricep, and that is pretty much the pathways of the sartorius that will go down to the side of the leg and will connect with the tibia and down to the medial malleolus, both this way, right, creating the Cupid's bow, right? And here the same thing here and here, right? So all these forms are aesthetically connected, because the connection between the iliac spine here, where the sartorius begins, right here. This is the iliac spine. Sartorius begins in here, goes down across the leg, and goes now to the side here. This is a goose foot. The goose foot continues with the tibia. That is not necessarily a structural, or anatomical structure, right? It's aesthetic. It's an aesthetic. It doesn't have a necessarily functional aspect. It's just aesthetic. But it helped our artists to draw these connection between the various parts of the body. If we don't do that, we tend to isolate a bump in here and bump in there. And as Leonardo insulted Michelangelo, saying that his drawing looked like a sack full of nuts. And so if you don't have the bump in the right places, the figure will look like a sack full of nuts. Of course, Michelangelo knew exactly where to put the muscle in there, and Leonardo was just being mean, right? But can you imagine that, being insulted by Leonardo, right? Oops. So but Michelangelo could take it, right? He could take it, right? So now we see here eventually that when we look at the figure, right? This is a drawing that sometimes we do sketches in a class to study the figure. When we have all these things come together, we have the anatomy, we have the structure, we have the perspective, we have foreshortening, we have the stereometric rendering, and of course the technique. The techniques also discussed in the book, in a chapter on techniques, but it's not let's say it's not for today. But we see here how what is the little arrows here? I lost the arrow. Here you go. We see how we could look at this as, so the jugular fossa was just under here, was not visible. That's the sternum, right? So the sternum, and I see how the sternum will continue with the linea alba, we continue with the linea alba down the navel, down below the navel, and then toward the genitals. So even if not visible, I have to make sure that that line is invisibly but wait, what happened? I pushed some wrong button, right? Let me go back a second, then I'm going to conclude this, right? Because maybe maybe I can answer some question, right? So
yeah, great timing, because we are coming up to where we have about 20 minutes left of the program.
Okay, so let's answer some question, right? So
exactly.
let's see. Okay, here.
I got one in the chat that I'm going to read, but I want to encourage folks. I mean, thank you, number one, Roberto, for sharing that fantastic PowerPoint with all of us. And folks, we do have about 20 minutes left, so feel free, please drop your questions in the chat and we will make sure to get to as many as we can. And we had a great one from Alan already, saying that one quality of many that I appreciate of your work is the rendering of the muscles. How do you go about depicting the notion of fibers in terms of the form without going overboard with that detail?
This is a good question. So what I do, I start as drawing the muscle without fibers as volumes, right? So I think first thing I do is I think starting point, ending point, volume, draw it as a volume has no fibers, because the fibers are going to be a distraction, right? Then you start rendering it as if it were a football. Imagine a football, right? There's no fibers like that, right? And then you render the volume. Okay, if the light hits in here, that's the shadow, etc. Once you have the volume, the fiber go on top of it. And the fiber, you don't need a lot of fiber because the volume is already described, right? So then you go with the fibers, trying to kind of have them maybe more packed together in certain areas, more a little bit less visible in other areas, but they also fall. Basically, the fiber now will follow the form. if instead you start with the fibers tend to be all flat and even, and it flatten the form and take over. The priority is the volume, right? So the fibers are the squeaky wheel. The squeaky wheel gets the meal, right? They say, look at me, look at the fiber, look how many we are. You draw, okay, I draw them, right? But you have to say, okay, conceptualize what's important is the form, Lock in the form, render it as it were polished, and then put in the fiber over it in function of the form. So the fiber have to respect the volume, right? This being said, the fiber is very important because what they do, they reveal all those. Sometimes you have this kind of radiating pattern, right, overlap in a form like this, so fibers coming together like that. They will reveal that, so they are going to be really important to put in, but don't put a lot of it. Also, because in a cadaver or even a living person, you don't see them that many. They are not that. They're not that visible. So you're going to have fascicle group, but you don't see the single fibers that clearly. You see more like a fascicles, groups of fibers that kind of come together, right? So it privileged the form, I would say, right? So yeah, great question. Right? So see if I can get to more questions. We have a bunch of questions, but I only see two. Let me see. How do I get down here? Abby, can you see if you can?
There's some kind comments and there's some people asking, but there's no other questions that I see as of yet. Linda did ask, she's not here anymore, but did ask about where she can see it. And just note, I am gonna drop in a link to the YouTube chat and a link to your book at the end of the program too. So feel free to share that resource.
Yeah, thank you.
And Anne asked about your upcoming workshops, which include Zoom life drawing sessions. So can you talk about how that works, teaching Zoom over, or life drawing over Zoom?
Yeah, so I was, I'm a convert. In the sense that convert are the worst type, right? The people, I have friends that were smoking, and stop smoking, and suddenly they bother everybody to smoke. I'm like that, right? Meaning, I didn't like online. Now I do it and say, wow, that's cool. It's really good tool, right? So as long as we understand what Zoom can do, what cannot do, we're gonna be happy about that. Meaning, when I started doing Zoom, I realized almost immediately that the main advantage are that people don't have to ask me to move professor, I can see what you're drawing, right? Because so everybody is like looking right behind my shoulder, my hand, right? That, because of the great clarity of what I'm doing. I am drawing I can draw in a variety of techniques, whereas when I work in the big demos, that I do life-size demos, I pretty much use charcoal and chalk and color chalk on brown paper, because that way people distant can see, etc. When I draw on a smaller piece of paper using my trusted iPad here, I can draw pretty much every technique. So students also have access to a variety of techniques, charcoal and graphite and watercolor and truck crayon technique, and you name it, right? The other thing is that, so they also learn the technique, different technique. And that is another thing that helps a lot, because many times as I was painting, I heard people like, oh, that's how you do it. I said, oh, yeah, meaning sometimes, because I don't know, we don't know what students know or what they want to know. And maybe sometimes students don't think that's the way you do it. But as you see somebody do it, then you say, okay, that's how you do it. This is a great learning curve in a technique, in a media like this. The other thing is that you can watch it over and over again. I mean, if you miss something, because the concept are, I wouldn't say over and over, but a couple of times, right? I would say that some techniques are complex, right? Are difficult, and maybe especially watercolor courses, when they go over things, I had to go over fast, because I cannot wait, because the paint is drying and need to paint right away. And what happened now, students maybe they fall behind because they tend to mix the paint, etc., and they miss this passage. So they can go back and watch it again. In fact, many students, and I have do exactly that. They follow the course, we get the first in Primatura, right? And then after that, they go back and then redo it and redo it and redo it. And I have many students doing it 1, 2, 3 times, and you see an incredible progression learning. So it is definitely a great technique, a great medium, actually, great medium that really permits me to convey much more. And of course, this can be they can be also supported by drawing classes from life as soon as COVID let us, right? Yeah, so I think that these online classes are not going to go away. I think they're very important, and we have been refining them as faculty. We have been all refining them, finding all our methods. So also following the student, because the other thing is that we can hear more directly from the students, and it's a very important feedback that we have. Student, maybe they want to know about this, they want to know about that, and maybe in the classroom people don't, hey, what is that, right? Don't tend not to do that, but here, yeah, I receive emails, even personal email, etc. And if students don't feel like showing the work, they don't, which is also another important thing, because sometimes in the classroom, you don't do your best work and you're like, oh my God, this sucks. I hope people don't see it, or you feel embarrassed. And that's where we are, right? But here, no, if you decide not to show, you just simply don't show it, right? And if you do, then it becomes a class experience. So people can see what you did, see my comment, and we can still learn from other people's work and other comment I give to other people. So it has a collegial quality that is maintained, right? So that was a long answer, right?
There's a lot to say about Zoom. There's a lot of.
I'm a convert. I told you I'm a convert, right? So I'm going overboard, right? So.
So we've got a couple more questions I want to make sure we get to in the chat. One is just a practical one. We've gotten a question about how to access your first book. We've got a constituent here from Canada. Thank you for joining us, who is asking about bookstores. And then we also had Alan mentioned asking about your second book. So I'll drop a link to that in the chat too, to make sure we'll have that promo code.
So this is the second book, right? Just came out recently, and it was like having a baby almost, but almost. No C-section though, luckily. So, but so the first book, what happened is I don't know what Amazon is doing. They're selling it for $120, but if you go to a bookstore, you buy for the price, which is $35, $40. So there are the COVID slowdown. There's been a shortage in paper, and pretty much publishing world is struggling with that. On top of that, most books are printed in China, and that also had problem with COVID, etc., coming back and forth. So it is in reprint. This is the third reprint. And it should be available in normal numbers in June, but you can find it. You can find it on the, if you go on Amazon, I wouldn't go on Amazon because they sell it for $120, which is fine, right? But it doesn't make a difference for me. I would go, I know that the student found it at Strands, they found it at all the bookstores. You might call in advance, you find it there for the regular price. So maybe that's what you want to do, and then you buy it a strand for $30, and then you put it on eBay for 120, right? Could do that, right? You go out and sushi on me. Right. So, but it's coming. It's coming. The third print is coming, and it should be here in June. But you can find it. Just sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. I don't know what's going on, but I think it's a problem with distribution and COVID-related logistical problem, right? So, so the other book, yeah, it's out now, and you can. Just probably find it on Amazon without any problem. It should be available on Amazon. So Amazon, I know that some people don't want to buy on Amazon because it's there's a strike or something going on, that's fine. But you can find it on Barnes and Noble or Strands or any big bookstore. I'm thinking they have. I think that this book is also, I mean, the previous one is also at the Met here in New York. I go at the Met bookstore, but probably online you find it in a big bookstore. You find it other than Amazon. So yeah.
Perfect. So we have another question from Carol that's asking about how to start. What is the best way to start drawing figures? So kind of entry level, this process that you talked about, or if there's other ways such as starting with shapes for a novice. I guess what's your, I know that could be a whole class, but in short form.
Yeah, no, no, I think the easiest way is the stereometry, is the dreaded boxes. Everybody hates the boxes, but the boxes, what they do in reality, they simplify the approach. Meaning, when you find yourself in front of a model, you say, "Oh my God, what do I do now?" Right? There's so much stuff, so much information that it can be intimidating, right? But if you say, "Okay, you know what? Like when you had 10 people talking, right? That's like that. You have 10 people talking, you can follow anybody. And you got the skin, and you got the bones, you got the muscle, and you got the hair, you got it. And you say, okay, I just want to know how high, how wide, and what's the angle between the parts. That's all I want to know. So in order to do that, what you do is say, okay, how big is the head compared to the torso, compared to the lower part? How long is the arm compared to this? And then you draw just that, line or volume. So by doing that, you conceptualize the body, and it's easier to measure it. It's easier to measure it because, again, you don't get distracted by the curve here and the other curve here. You just go boom, and then you go boom, and then you go boom. That's it. So you have 1, 2, 3, right? And or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you really go into the detail, you can create this kind of spiraling form, which is part of the proportional relationship on the hand, right? But you find the main volumes, the length and width and depth of the main volumes, and you start with those. You draw them in a cylinder. On top of those, you can superimpose more information. But in the beginning, if you draw these boxes or boxes, they call boxes, right? The stereometric rendering. It's a way to really take charge over the figure. After that, you can add facial features. You can add the bumps. For example, if I have the arm here like this, right? If I start with deltoid in here, I don't know where it's going to end in relation to the total length. But if I draw the total length like this, and I say, oh, this is kind of halfway down, then I know that within the given measurement, within the now this is a known entity. Because I draw this is a known entity. Now within the known entity, I have another known entity that stops halfway down. Make sense? So I know where this stops, and that's another one. So now I have control of the form. But if I start from the blue with the line, whoa, right? What I'm doing here, right? When is it stopping? Where's it going? So you lose control. And now you have all these floating forms. They don't really come together. It's really, once you understand the structure like this, then you can draw starting with the line, because your brain now sees, okay, this is halfway down here, and then you have another half in here. Then you have something that's a little bit shorter here, and then another one here, this angle like this. So what you're doing, you're selecting the information that you want to do, and this is essential information. After that, so you draw in stages. The first stage is not aesthetic. There is no aesthetic allowed or involved. It's just measurement. Knowing that is like, oh, it takes a lot of pressure off my back. Right? Aesthetic, oh, what is aesthetic? What is such? It's ugly. No aesthetic, just a measurement, right? Just a measurement. After that, that measurement is correct. Then you can invest time and energy in moving on to the next stage. If that measurement is not correct, the whole body could be right, could be wrong, and then you end up with all these long limbs and small heads and big feet and tiny hands. You know what I'm saying? So they're not proportional. But if you measure first and then ask questions later, measure first and then add the volumes on top, right? So does it help? Does it help? Yeah, there is a spiraling for the Fibonacci sequence. Yeah, the golden section, etc. I mean, these are all in there. I think that this the Fibonacci, the equiangular spiral, the golden section are all things that the concept that we want to consider, but we want to use them as a tool. All of this that I showed you, you want to use it as a tool. It's a tool, right? Meaning you don't want to delegate your aesthetics to this technique or to the knowledge of anatomy. If you look at all the, for example, Caravaggio painted the body very, very well, correctly, right? But then he hides half of it. Meaning the display of anatomical knowledge was important in the early Renaissance because they were, again, as I said before, looking at the world like a young person. Wow, I was closed inside for a year with the COVID. Now I go out and the birds and the flowers, how beautiful it is, everything, right? So the same thing in here. When you look at the world with a new method, or for the first time, when you know method, it's like looking at the first time. So not that they didn't see the world, but they're saying instead of looking at the world with the medieval mind, we look at it with the humanistic mind, and everything is different. Because the method of think of for example, of reading or looking at the bug with your naked eyes, or looking at the bug with a microscope. It's a different method of analysis. You see different things, right? So I always do that, right? I then forget what the main point was.
Let's make sure we have one more question, and then we'll have to say goodbye to folks. Someone asked if they need to read your first book before reading your second. So does it matter the order in which you consume, or
no, doesn't matter. I mean, it's they are one is movement and one is and there's both. There's a little bit of overlapping in both, right? Of course, one focuses more on the structure aspect, and the other one on the movement and aesthetic aspect. But the second book has some anatomy. The descriptive anatomy, but then the anatomy quickly moves toward the functionality, the movement, etc. The previous one has some, as mostly systematic anatomy, and then some aesthetic aspect connected with technique, some movement, etc. But one clearly is more about topographic or systematic anatomy, and the other is more like aesthetic and movement. So you can start with one, and then you realize typically what happens is this, like you take a class in something and you realize you need something else, then you take that class. When the moment you realize that you need that too, it's a good moment because now you know why you need it. Make sense? So sometimes learning works like that. I don't know why I had to take chemistry, right? And then you start mixing colors. Oh, now I'm gonna take a class in chemistry, right? And so that's why all the colors were so bad, because I didn't know anything about chemistry. So same thing in here. When you tackle a problem, if the problem of the subject really fascinates you, you're gonna take charge of your education. You know what you need. Now you go look for specific information that you need. It's a good place to be. So you can start from either book. It doesn't matter. It's just as long as you buy them both.
It's a great plug. And before we end, we had one more question asking about the class you're teaching for PAFA, specifically on the figure. And they asked how long it is. It's 6 weeks, but they also asked if it's just covering the beginning of figure drawing, or if you could describe in a little more detail that class. Because you're teaching another one too.
What course is this? The one of figure anatomy or figure drawing? Figure drawing. Yeah, no. I'm going to start with that. I'm going to start with these basic forms and volume. They need to be. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail of the anatomy, but the essential volume, yes, because I want to direct that toward the figure anatomy. So yes, I'm going to deal with some structural aspect of the body, structural anatomy, but not in great detail like I would do layered muscle, the deep muscle, superficial muscle in a more specific course. So it's going to be more directly directed toward the practice of figure drawing, some technique, etc. So yeah, I think it would be a good introductory course. And then from there, you can take more specialized courses if you want, right? So
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Roberto, for sharing your vast knowledge and that fantastic PowerPoint. And I wanted to thank everyone for being here. And I dropped a link to Roberto's book in the chat, as well as where this video will go on YouTube. So make sure to save the chat before you leave, and we hope to see you again. So thank you all. If you want to unmute and say goodbye on your way out, it's been so nice to have you. But Roberto, before that, I'll let you have the final word.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all. I know a lot of you because I've seen you in the little screen in my Zoom classes. So one day we'll meet in person, right? And thank you so much for showing up, and appreciate your persistence in anatomy, right? And thank you, Renee. Thank you so much for introducing me, right? And thank you, Abby. Thank you. Great job. And it was a great afternoon. I hope you enjoyed it, right?
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Roberto.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renee.